All right, I think we're going to have a very interesting and energizing forum this afternoon. We have a leading national and international expert on public policy, social insurance, and also the politics surrounding it. We have the next member of Congress who will represent Seattle and be a national leader for all the social justice issues that we hold dear, and this will be likely for the next 20 or 30 years, or possibly even longer. This nation is facing a severe retirement security crisis. There's a huge gap between pensions and retirement savings that American households have and what they're actually going to need. If you look at a healthy couple at age 50 to 65, they're going to need more than $500,000 for health care expenses to come up with the rest of their lifetime. If you look at American working age families, half of them at this point don't have any retirement savings. And if you look at those who do, the median is about $5,000. So you can see there's a huge mismatch there. So this forum will focus on what can be done in the next Congress to address this crisis by expanding Social Security and Medicare. Today's co-sponsors are Physicians for a National Health Program. I forgot to say I'm David McClanahan, coordinator for the Western Washington chapter. Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action, Healthcare for All Washington, Healthcare is a Human Right Washington, Washington State Labor Council, AFL-CIO, Washington Community Action Network, SEIU 75, SEIU 1199 Northwest, and UFC W21, as well as UAW 4121. And some of the sponsors have tables in the back. So the format of this forum will be presentations by speakers, followed by a panel discussion with questions from the audience. And first, to save some time, I'll introduce the speakers all at once, and the panel moderator. Ted Marmor, Professor Emeritus of Public Policy and Political Science at Yale University, and to name very few of his credentials and accomplishments, Ted is a former director of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's postdoctoral program in health policy, and co-author of 11 books and numerous publications on public policy focused on Social Security, Medicare, and other social programs. He's testified before Congress, been a consultant to Congressional committees and the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as to several states. And he's been on the editorial board of the Journal of Health, Politics, Policy, and Law for decades, I think. Pramila Jayapal and Brady Walkinshaw are candidates for the 7th Congressional District. The next 4 to 8 years are going to be critical for our democracy, but we should be optimistic. The young people in this country appear to have values that we need to achieve social justice on a wide range of issues. They will actually make up the largest voting bloc in 2020. However, to turn them on, to believe that their advocacy and vote will actually make a transformative difference, we need talented and charismatic leaders that they can believe in, who will help organize and build the movement to fight for what we need rather than what we're told we can have that is politically possible. And Pramila and Brady have these qualities. The first speaker will be, based on the flip of a coin, will be Pramila Jayapal, who represents the 37th District in Washington State Senate. She immigrated to the U.S. at age 16 years by herself to attend college and received her bachelor's degree from Georgetown University and followed that up with an MBA from Northwestern University. In 2001, after the 9/11 attacks, she started the Hate-Free Zone, which became One America, which is the largest immigrants' rights organization in Washington State. Brady Walkinshaw represents the 43rd District in the Washington State House. He's a graduate of the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University, and prior to being a legislator, he worked as a program officer for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Both Bradley and Pramila are strong advocates for social justice in the legislature. Both are strong single-payer supporters and co-sponsors of our state single-payer legislation, the Washington Health Security Trust. Robbie Stern, president of Puget Sound Advocates for Retirement Action, will moderate the panel. It's safe to say that anyone who's tried to organize anything in Washington State in the last 50 years knows Robbie. He's a tireless advocate with the bleeding heart of a lion and the tenacity of a bulldog. Before we finish this afternoon, Robbie will describe the resolutions that PSARA has championed to have the Seattle City Council and the King County Council support the expansions of Social Security and Medicare benefits in their legislative agenda in Washington, D.C., and also to ask those councils to pressure our congressional delegate to support those when they in the next Congress. We'll also talk about how all of us can get involved too as we move forward in this endeavor. Thank you.
I just want to say that David has been a bulldog in putting this program together. He's just been terrific and has been a pleasure to work with. And David, thank you so much for all your work. It's just
I couldn't have done it without your muscle, Robbie.
If you have to rely on a 72-year-old muscle brother, you're in trouble. So what we're going to do is we're going to start this program by hearing from Professor Marmor. And he's going to kind of lay the framework of what we're looking at, where we are, where we need to go. And then we're going to hear from these two talented candidates on how they will work to help implement making it possible for us to have retirement security for everyone, which includes obviously expanded Social Security and Medicare program. It's a very different context that we're talking in now than we would have talked in even 4 years ago. Because all of a sudden, we're hearing as part of this national campaign, everyone, all the candidates, in one way or another, talking about the need to expand Social Security and Medicare. And just 4 years ago, we were looking at a fight that we were thinking we were going to have to fight to preserve the program. But we've gone on the offensive, and we got to stay on the offensive. So this is going to be part of that effort. This forum is part of that effort. And it's truly an honor to welcome to our fair city Professor Ted Marmor, who will help lay the groundwork for what we have to do. Professor Marmor.
It's conventional when introductions are given in that form that you say, I wish my mother were here to listen to me. I'm not going to give a lecture of the conventional academic sort. I'm going to do three things, I hope. I'm going to try to do three things. One will be to give you a sense of what it is that I've gone through since 1965, 66, when I was in the government during the time Medicare was legislated and initiated. And what I've learned by following both Medicare and Social Security in that period, what I've learned about good defense and good offense, and when to do both simultaneously. And what I want to mention to you is a fact about Medicare's history that I will ask you to tell me about at the end that you already knew. Did you know, for example, when Part B was added to Medicare? No. if I said to you that it was added to Medicare in 1965, at the very time the legislation was put through, would you find that surprising? In other words, we don't know about that. And that's where I want to begin. The striking fact about American social insurance programs, Medicare, disability, retirement savings, and the role of Social Security as the largest life insurance program in the United States for those who lose a family member, a breadwinner. These are huge programs. They are broadly popular. That as you mention them, people do not retaliate with hostility. By probably 4 to 1, they're in favor. But what do they know about the details? For some odd reason, over the period since 1965, we have lost increasingly touch with the premises of these social insurance programs. So where I'm going to begin is what those premises are. Number one, social insurance programs do not use eligibility criteria that investigate your current income or your assets. In other words, the theory of eligibility is that you participated by contributing, it's a form of tax, but an earmarked tax for either disability, Medicare, or retirement savings, or life insurance. Second, that the treatment of the people in the program is common. There's not a set of rules that apply to people at the bottom of the income distribution, the middle, or the top. It's in that sense a common benefit, equally accessible to all the members when they're sick or when they're disabled. It's a little different about retirement, but I'll get into that in a moment. Third, the funding for this can be not only contributions, but could be gasoline taxes. There's no reason. The funding process is to extract, like a hydraulic system, resources from the finances of the society, but put them into a program that distributes them according to the rules that I just talked about. What does that mean for let's take Medicare now. Medicare in 1965 was a proposal for 60 days of hospital care, and that's all. Why that? Because in 1948, 49, 50, and 51, President Truman was pushing universal health insurance of exactly the kind that you would recognize. And every single year, the conservative coalition of the Congress, dominated by Southern Democrats who were extremely conservative ideologically and backed by the Republicans, shut down those programs, even though 2/3 of the Americans, when asked, were strongly in favor of that program. So here we are in 2016 in exactly the same position they were in the late 50s, early 40s, and we were, I in this case, a young academic in 1965. So popular support, the sense of approval for a social insurance form of medical care, financing and eligibility, for retirement savings, for disability coverage, and for life insurance, those were the common elements, and the argument was if you have a means test and an asset test for programs, it'll go to people only whose low income makes them eligible. And that means programs for poor people will be under attack from other people right from the beginning. So that's where I begin. But I'm going to continue with the Medicare story. So 60 days of hospital care. And guess what happened in the executive sessions of the Ways and Means Committee, March 3rd, 1965. My boss, Wilbur Cohen, the head of Social Security, Robert Ball, were in the executive sessions. And Wilbur Mills, famous then for his prudence, later famous for Fatty Fox and whatever it is, and the fountain, I guess. Yeah. It's good to know there's some people in this room who remember such things. The episode was extraordinary. Mills, who had voted against Medicare every single time it had been proposed in the late 50s and under JFK, 61, 62, 63, and in 64, after Kennedy had been assassinated, He helped to defeat the program in the Ways and Means Committee by 13 to 12. Then came the Goldwater deluge, the extraordinary architectonic shift in American politics. 2-to-1 Democrats in the House of Representatives. No more Rules Committee. The Ways and Means Committee shifted from 15-10 to 17-8, Democrat to Republican. Remember I said 15-10? 13-12? You already can see, it's over. The question's settled. It's going to pass. But here's what's interesting, and here's, for me, trying to draw out the strategic question that will be relevant to this lady here or this fellow here. What to do in building up opportunity, and what to do when opportunity strikes. So at that point, the conservatives, led by Mills, turned to the HEW people and said, well, I think what you folks are for is a Part A for hospitals. But we think you need to go further. And we think you need to add a Part B. But we don't want to pay for that the way you pay for Social Security. Question, because that's a stable form of financing. Instead, we want everybody to have to sign up for it as if it were voluntary and paid for, half by general revenues and half by a flat tax on a per capita tax. So they changed the financing of the program A and B into 2 different models, and then they added Title 19. This is coming from the conservatives who defeated it before. Why would they do that? Because they were sure as day follows night that if Medicare was passed with 60 days of hospital care, the next effort would be to expand that program, arguably to children and arguably down. So there would be a pincer movement going on. So they brought that easy connection. And the reason I'm going into that is to suggest to you 2 things. One, the politics of Social Security and the politics of Medicare are not games played for children. They are the roughest politics you can possibly imagine. And that rough in the sense that the cleavages between those for and against are as deep as we know how to go. They're both material grounds and they're value grounds. The people who oppose Social Security and Medicare oppose it because they think it's the wrong way to do government. And the people who are for social insurance, whether for retirement or Medicare, think that's the way to do things. One conception of government is that government ought to help people who have been in trouble. It ought not to help people avoid trouble. It ought to clean up the troubles once they already show. And the presumption of social insurance is if you know there's a threat to the stability and financial viability of families, and that it could happen to anybody, you pool those resources in order for people, when catastrophe hits, or is bound to hit, they'll be cushioned by it. That's the single most important thing I want to communicate to you. We need to be getting back to fundamentals about what divides people over these programs, not just count up the cost under one or another scheme. Now, what does that imply for today? What does it imply as we think about Medicare? I think a number of things. The most obvious is that the benefits covered by Medicare as of 1965 need bolstering and expansion. It's not only, dental care is too important to people's health to treat it as somehow a matter of cosmetic preoccupation. Drug coverage is already so confused with Part D. It needs to be straightened out and simplified so that it's a program that covers drugs wherever you are in the income distribution and doesn't treat you to the impossible task of anticipating what drugs you're going to need. It's crazy. The idea that you're deciding on drug coverage as if you're deciding on what apple pie you like, whether you like cherry pie better. It's not an activity that we're very good at, and we can't be very good at it because it's impossible to know beforehand. So Part C, Part D certainly needs change. Now Part C, I was walking down streets here coming today, and I saw a sign, if I got this right, it said, Aetna's Medicare. What? Aetna fought Medicare like crazy. This is Orwellian. The opposite of the truth is presented as the truth. Well, thank you for that. What I urge you to do, though, is encourage those who speak on your behalf, folks like this, not cavalierly to say bullshit when bullshit is actually delivered, but to become more intolerant of lies, factual distortions, repetition of factual distortions, challenges to people's claims of truthfulness without evidence to be put forward, and those who say it's all a matter of financing and the deficit, rather than a matter of financing and what values Americans have for the kind of community they want. So let me now illustrate. Hold on till the end. You don't know that you're going to feel the same way. What does it imply for thinking about Social Security first and then Medicare second? I've said a word or two about Medicare, but I'm going to do it more starting with Social Security. First thing is every time you hear someone, I think I've got the words here, but I wrote them down, who says, I saw this in a newspaper in Corvallis this week, and this banker says, Social Security faces serious financial challenges, and the problem of insolvency is there to be worried about. Let me work on a more genteel conception of what to say. Let's call this balderdash. Or cockamamie, maybe would be better. Finally, call it stupid. And the reason it's stupid is that to talk about a federal government program going insolvent is to forget that the federal government has the authority to change the program enough to cover a facing problem, and it's got the power to tax. The question that gives Social Security political security is not the legal claim that it's in a trust fund. It's the political backing for people who would make the Congress do what it should do. It might, for example, in an international catastrophe, have to make a slight adjustment for a year. It's possible. It's not gold. It's not, the Supreme Court has said that the Social Security benefit is a gratuity of the government to its citizens. So legally it's not property. But politically it is. In all the time Social Security has been with us, has it missed a day, a week, a month of payment? Of course not. So the claim that the government is incompetent to cope with whatever changes there are is crazy. Secondly, the use of the metaphor of Social Security is the third rail of American politics. It electrocutes those who touch it. How can a sacred cow be victimized by electricity? You can't have the metaphors going every which way. If it's a sacred cow, it's not going to be taken advantage of. So that's what I want to say. One, the fearfulness, the protection of the program against fearful claims about its future is the defensive tactic, number one. The offensive tactic, number two, is that since the financial catastrophe of 2007-8, what have we learned? What we've learned is that the Social Security system is the most secure source of retirement income. Notice when David was talking earlier, retirement savings are not high. That's not true. Our savings are embedded in the Social Security system. Now, private individual savings, of course, is important. That's what David meant. But I think we need to watch our language and treat the Social Security system as a fundamental building block. You need to worry for that building block what kind of pillars it stands on. And there's room for saying we need alternative sources of income because we don't want to have only wage income as the source of income. You want to diversify to some extent. But watch out for claiming A, that it's in trouble, B, that it's going to be insolvent and something big is done, or D, that we're not saving for retirement. In fact, we are. And at the margin, small increases in the Social Security taxes produce huge amounts. That's what happens when 170 million people are in the workforce. That's what makes Social Security so stable. You don't have to adjust very much to take into account changing social economic conditions. Okay? That's what, so defense, yes, against misrepresentations. Offense, yes, make the argument clear that we need to do this because we have an unstable source of retirement income in personal savings in the stock market. As we all learned, either ourselves or our neighbors, when the value of savings was reduced so sharply, 40% in 1 year in the stock market. So let me turn from that to some other statements about Medicare. And here's the way I'd like to talk about Medicare. Imagine a speaker went up to you and said, I want to evaluate Medicare by 5 standards. One is I want to evaluate it by the extent to which it covers everybody in the category it was designed to cover. Is it partial cover? Is it partial in the sense of the population, 50% of the population? No. Medicare covers almost all of those who have been in the workforce. Some continue to work afterwards and use insurance from their employment. But it's quasi-universal in that sense. Well, what about, is Medicare comprehensive in its benefit package? No. That isn't because the advocates for Medicare didn't want that. It's because it's been blocked. So the burden of claiming what's been blocked is that we've not, it took many years, decades in fact, to expand the prescription drugs. And the form it took in prescription drugs was a Republican conception of how to do it with a Democratic conception of for whom. That's what the bargain was between Kennedy and Bush. Bush said there's $400 billion for 10 years. The only way you can do that responsibly is to restrict it to low-income elderly. Kennedy said, I won't give any approval in the Senate for that kind of scheme. It's got to cover all older Americans. But if you take $400 billion over 10 years and divide it into a population twice the size that it was prepared for, you would get things like the donut hole in the benefit package. That's where that came. They gave an inadequate amount of money to the actuaries, and they produced a donut hole, which plus a catastrophic scheme after 5% of your income forever will be spent on drugs. There's no ultimate limit on the Medicare program as it's structured now because of those adjustments in 2003. Well, we mentioned already dental care, and obviously it's the case that drugs, dental care, and eye care, now you've got to distinguish. The eye care you need is prescription lenses. What you don't need is colored glasses. I hope this group is not going to be in favor of pink glasses or glasses like this color. This is not important for sight. And finally, what I would say in setting out these arguments, I would say that the most important things for Americans over the next 5 to 10 years is to accept that we're unlikely to get dramatic change in Social Security or Medicare, but we're going to get marginal change if the pressures are enough. And this is my view. My view is you have to do good defense and some offense, but even more important, my view is that advocates of change have got to produce a compelling portrait of what American medical care and retirement security should be like, and then elect a Congress that will enact it the way Medicare was enacted in 1965. Thank you very much.
Obviously, there was a lot of content to that presentation, and now we're going to hear from the 2 candidates for the 7th Congressional District on their response to what Professor Marmor had to say and what their own ideas are about how they're going to move forward a program to make retirement security real. for everyone. So we'll start with Senator Pramila Jayapal.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Marmor, for those incredibly great words. And I think I feel like if I say anything, I'm going to hear Boulder Dash, cockamamie. So we've got our monitor right here. I want to also say thank you so much to David McClanahan for organizing this, to Robbie Stern, who has just been such a champion for so long on so many issues, and to all of you in the room, because I think we've been in this fight together for quite some time. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time just on my background, because I think I actually know most of you in the room, but also because this is a really important opportunity to talk about these two programs. I will say that, when we think about taking on the roughest politics, as Dr. Marmor said, that is my history. I've taken on some of the roughest politics around hate, civil rights, discrimination, taking on the Bush administration and winning around illegal deportations, organizing for comprehensive immigration reform before there was a movement really for comprehensive immigration reform, being on the front lines of the fight for 15. If anybody can do rough politics, but with tremendous generosity and love and abundance, I hope you know that it's me that's going to be right there. So, and I think that is a lot of what we're facing in this country today, is the need to build the movements. And I was really encouraged to see maybe a month ago or so that the polling now shows for the first time that the majority of Americans across political parties believe that we should expand Social Security and Medicare. That is a huge accomplishment, and it comes because of the movement that was built and the presidential campaigns and the campaign of Bernie Sanders and a lot of folks talking about these issues for some time. And I think that we are in a place where we could make some really important change, even though our Constitution is set up so that it's very difficult to make big changes quickly. So, when I think about Social Security and Medicare, what I think about is that these programs really are at the core about how this country takes care of people who work hard and who contribute themselves to building the country. And it really is the distinction of this role of government. What role should government play? And I happen to be in the category of believing that government's role is to take care of everybody, and those most vulnerable, but also everybody through the scale. And this idea of Social Security and Medicare, these two great social programs, are based on the fact that if I pull my money in and you pull your money in, and you have enough people, which you do in the way the programs are structured today, then my money can take care of you as you get older, yours can take care of you as you get older, yours can take care of me as I get older. And it is that idea that we are all better off when we're all better off that is at the core of these two social insurance programs. And it's also about the central premise that when you die or are injured, that your family members will be taken care of. And I thought I would just bring a few statistics on Washington State, even though I think we have a lot of folks who really know these statistics already, about what these programs have done right here in Washington State. So Social Security benefits were paid to over 1.2 million people in our state, about one in 6 of our total population. Retired folks, spouses, kids, disabled workers, spouses, kids of workers who died. And I'll tell you that these programs are personal for me, because some of you know my husband, Steve Williamson. His father died when he was 6, committed suicide. And his mother at the time had 3 kids. It was not a time when women were out in the workplace earning a lot of money. And because of Social Security death benefits, Steve was able to go to college, and his siblings were able to go to college. And really it's what allowed Hazel, who has passed on just a year ago, but it's what allowed her and that family and those kids, because we often think about Social Security as being for elders, but in fact, it takes care of about 50,000 kids in our state. So that story of Hazel and Steve and David and Nancy is not singular. It really is the story of so much of our country. And so many people who were lifted out of poverty. So just here in Washington alone, over 300,000 folks are lifted out of poverty. And Social Security is the only source of income for a third of all Washingtonians who are over 65. What about the racial dynamics? Let's talk about that for a second. Social Security helps 1 in 8 African Americans and 1 in 10 Latinos. It helps 1 in 6 women, almost 750,000 retired workers, and over 50,000 kids. Now, Dr. Marmor referred to this earlier, all the lies that are out there, and this idea that we are in a post-truth moment. We certainly have a post-truth candidate there who just believes that you can just say things and they will be true. So you can say there's 42% unemployment, and lo and behold, people actually think that there's 42% unemployment. But that is not new, and let's just say that trickle-down economics, in my mind, is another example of how you just say something and you think it's true. Trickle-down economics is no theory, or no fact, it's just a theory. So people like the Koch brothers and Fox News and others keep trying to say that the program is bankrupt. Well, I don't know what kind of bankruptcy they know, but if having a $2.6 trillion surplus in the bank is bankruptcy, then how about we all become bankrupt? Because that's pretty darn good. So attacks on Social Security have been going on now for at least 4 decades and often financed by conservatives. So if you look at where a lot of these ideas come from, they come from these conservative think tanks. So we do need to make changes to the program, but the changes we need to make are to actually expand them and to lower the retirement age, to scrap the cap on highest income earners, and to actually keep this promise that if you work, we're going to take care of you when you can no longer work. And that's, I think, just a very simple promise that is at the core of who we are as Americans, at the core of what we believe democracy to be, and at the core of what we as a society continue to aspire for. So I did see that the Federal Reserve recently did a study that said that nearly half of the people that were surveyed didn't have enough on hand to pay for even a $400 emergency expenditure. So we have a lot of work to do to address income inequality, wealth inequality, and to address the programs that allow us to take care of folks in these moments. And I think that just moving to medical care for a second, the biggest issue is really the increase in the rates of spending on medical care. So this medical inflation, and if you look at healthcare, and I've always been a huge single-payer advocate. I was part of the when I ran One America, which most of you know, I was the founder and executive director of One America. We were part of Healthcare for All coalition. We've been fighting to make sure that we could actually provide healthcare as a right for everybody, that we could cover everybody. And when we got the ACA, we certainly insured millions of people. I serve on the Senate Healthcare Committee. We certainly insured millions of people that weren't otherwise insured. But I think that the ACA, in some ways, is an opportunity for us to see the gaps that really exist when you have a commercial insurance system. Because what I have heard on the Senate Healthcare Committee in hearings, as we've listened to bills and testimony, is that we are seeing the cost of copays too high, the cost of pharmaceutical drugs going through the roof, and we don't have the ability to bargain because that was blocked by conservatives for the prices of pharmaceuticals. And now you're seeing insurers leaving the space because it's not profitable. So the difference between Medicare and a commercial insurance program is that Medicare is actually designed to absorb risk. Right? So it serves individuals who have very costly and complex problems as well as those who are healthy. Whereas commercial insurance is designed to make sure that they're only serving the healthy and avoiding as much risk as possible. And there's actually a lot of money that is spent on making sure that you don't pay out for those really complex things. Anybody in the room who's gone through insurance can attest to this. I know I am fighting constantly with my insurance company around a whole bunch of things that really should be covered, but are not. But that's why Medicare was first enacted, because people over 65 weren't able to buy commercial insurance. And so we are really pooling the resources of the whole nation to take care of those who are most vulnerable. And I got this from a talk that Dr. Marmor did because I didn't know the numbers around this, so I'm giving a lot of credit for these statistics, but Medicare is more cost effective than commercial insurance on any level. So this is another one that we have to cry balderdash or cockamamie or whatever phrase we want to call when when we hear something that says, well, we can be much more effective and cost-effective in the private market, because what we've seen is we can use that bargaining power to negotiate prices. So Medicare pays, on average, 22% less for physician services, and the cost per capita are rising far more slowly than commercial insurance. So Jim McDermott, Congressman Jim McDermott, the seat that we are seeking to fill now, has big shoes. He's been a champion of single-payer healthcare. He has put forward some really comprehensive bills, including this year a bill that I was briefed on just recently around how we can structure this system for expanded care. And there are some options. You can certainly structure, I think, as the bill he introduced offers, the ability for states to be able to do what they need to do in order to provide this expanded care, single-payer healthcare option. And the benefit of that in a Congress that is very difficult to get everybody across the country to agree on is that if you allow that to happen, then states like Washington State, where we tend to be much more on the forefront of being able to put some of these changes in place, we can actually start to move forward if we provide the ability to do that within the federal law. We also know that we finally got to the place where we are talking about expanding Medicare, and Medicare would be an existing system that you could expand to provide for the kind of care we're talking about. And then, of course, we have the ability to do a smaller public option, and we've certainly done in Washington State some work on financing long-term care studies that would set us up for implementing a public option in Washington State. I was part of the lead on funding that last time. So I will just end by saying that for me, I am an organizer. That is my background. That is how I come to these issues, and I have helped build coalitions and fight for issues that many people thought were just not possible. And in fact, they sometimes take more than a decade to bring into being. But what I believe is that we are at a place in this country, partly because of the presidential campaigns, partly because people are really understanding and feeling squeezed on every level around their incomes, around what is possible, around the high cost of college education, around the fact that their grandkids or kids are coming out with $40,000 in debt, that people are realizing that they are in these tremendously fragile places. And that is an opportunity for organizing. It is an opportunity for us to build a very broad, diverse coalition to start to move forward some of these things. And the places in which the Affordable Care Act has failed, I see as opportunities to really move forward on why they failed and why we need to have government stepping in to really provide those services, because otherwise there is no commercial benefit to providing these services. There shouldn't be to healthcare. Healthcare should not be based on how much you can charge for the EpiPen. It should be based on how we save lives with the EpiPen. So I can't wait to work on those issues in Congress. Really excited to have the diversity of coalition across the state in so many different sectors that we are going to need if we are going to play both offense and defense in the United States Congress. And I hope to continue that work with you and hope for your vote in November. Thank you all so much.
Now we're going to hear from Representative Brady Walkinshaw.
But I want to start just by thanking Robbie Stern. I want to thank the professor here who's joined us. I want to thank my colleague, Senator Jayapal, and everyone for helping bring together a forum that I've really been excited about and looking forward to. This is one of the first that we've had on this campaign where it's been a really focused and substantive policy forum. So I just want to thank Sarah and everyone involved with helping put this together. So let's give them a round of applause. I spent a lot of my upbringing living and working in Latin America, and someone who really deeply influenced me was a writer a lot of people know, Paulo Freire. And there's this very famous story that Paulo Freire tells of work that he was doing in rural communities in Brazil on education. And he spoke a lot about consciousness and education. And there's this famous story of Paulo Freire. He's out in this indigenous women's group, and he's having this conversation about how to teach literacy as a way of building consciousness. And he spells out on the board the words land, L-A-N-D in Portuguese. And uses that as a way then to teach and to have a conversation about land, but then says education is about creating consciousness, and that land is actually what the people he was working with didn't have. And using that as a way of creating consciousness through education. And I think today, the Aetna healthcare example, the Aetna Medicare example was brought up. I think it's the same thing. I was sitting here listening to the professor speak, and as we think about the healthcare debate in this country, as we think about the debate around the expansion of Social Security and the expansion of Medicare through a single payer option, which many of you in this room have been to Victrola Coffee with me on 15th on Capitol Hill when I've been in the legislature to talk about the single payer legislation at the state level. What I believe we are at the point of is really how do we build that consciousness so that when we talk about healthcare policy, it is taken in the frame of human rights, it's taken in the frame of justice, and it's taken in the frame of trying to build an effort out of this which today actually leverages the political resolve that we're starting to see, where in both parties you're seeing a majority of support come out behind two of the most important social programs and medical programs we have ever had in the United States. So that's what I think is so exciting. And for me personally, my mother's family came to this country from Cuba in the 1960s. They came here with nothing, 6th grade education. My grandfather, mi abuelo, started as a line cook at a roadside diner in Wilmington, Delaware. And, you know, 500,000, they probably cooked 500,000 Cuban sandwiches in the course of their lives. They owned little roadside, little sandwich shops in the eastern seaboard and retired, you know, into the lower middle class in a part of Florida, in Melbourne, Florida, which is on the Atlantic coast of Florida. And they were also very devout Republicans. As a lot of Cubans who came at that time, you would go into their home and you'd see a photo of Ronald Reagan on the wall. And what I always discovered they've since passed, but as my grandparents were aging, they really started to appreciate and acknowledge the impact that Social Security had in their lives. And sort of gradually softened broadly in their views politically around the benefits that they saw from Social Security providing for them as they aged. And I think it was very powerful for me to see that shift in my own grandparents as they aged and benefited from social programs that created the fabric for this in our democracy. So I'm going to say, I wanted to list, I jotted down, in coming to this today, I put down 3 ideas that I wanted to share with you all for why I believe we're poised right now as a society, as a country with strong leadership from right here in the 7th Congressional District to get us to that point politically where we do establish single-payer health care, which is something that Congressman Jim McDermott came in on in 1989, campaigning for and fought for in the Washington State Senate in the 1980s and in the 70s. That and the expansion of Social Security. So I believe that we're going to see 2 things. One is something that's impacting us in many parts of our society, which is as the structure of our labor force changes, and as we continue to see the rapid curve where productivity continues to outpace wages, which we have seen, and that's a trend line that is only going to continue even more rapidly into the future. As you see that, you see people be more disconnected from their sources of employment. And we saw what happened with the expansion of the Affordable Care Act. We insured 17 million people who had previously been uninsured under the Medicaid expansion. We still have 29 million people uninsured in this country, but at the same time, by increasing that eligibility age so people could stay on their parents' coverage until they were 26, and then also get access to the full suite of services from dental care to mental health services to chemical dependency and substance abuse, to all those things that should be covered in care options under a single payer system. We have seen a lot of progress. But what I believe will continue to build that political pressure to move in the direction that a lot of us hope the administration would be able to go in between 2009 and 2010, we're going to see more and more people, I believe, in our society who are on contract wages, who do not have stable sources of employment that are providing medical insurance options. You're going to see an economy that starts to shift more and more in the direction where you don't have stable sources of employee-based coverage. And I think as we start to see that, and this is going to happen You know, the first from the taxi industry to the hotel industry to service industries to more professionalized sectors like the legal profession. As we start to see that, I think you're going to start to see more and more pressure mount to build a political resolve, to do what we need, know what we need to do on Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare. The second thing I'll say that I've been thinking a lot about, which we all know, is that the United States as a country spends more money per capita than any other developed country in the world on our healthcare system. And in doing that, we manage to get some of the worst results. So that is something that we will increasingly, I think the figure is about we spend about $10,000 a person federally on healthcare. And if we start to look at ways we can bring that down, addressing micronutrient deficiencies in kids, if we start to think about ways that we can bring that down, it will have quite an impact, I believe, in the long-term policy direction that we'll be able to take. And the last thing that I'll close with, as we think about this issue here that we're here discussing, is how do we build the leadership to actually do this? And how do we actually build the leadership in Congress that will pass the type of reforms that we need to see in Medicare and Social Security expansion? So I think there are a lot of, I actually really appreciate the professor's remarks in how we talk about Social Security often being insolvent, when we shouldn't be talking about it being insolvent because that's actually a political choice. But we know the need to lift the cap on the payroll taxes, and we know what we can do there. We know that we can find other sources of revenue that can start to provide for that expansion that we need to see. But ultimately, what I take comfort in and what I'm assured by is that good public policy, and we see this in other areas too, good public policy in healthcare is going to save us billions and billions, trillions of dollars over the long term. And if we start to put in place those good public policies in our healthcare sector, it will save trillions of dollars. And an example of that is, I'll just give you a very small example that I worked on in the legislature two examples I worked on in the legislature this past few years. One is passing legislation called Joel's Law, which changes the way that we fund our mental health system in the state. Joel was a young man named Joel Rudy who was shot and killed by the Seattle Police Department July 5th, 2013 on Capitol Hill. And we came together, built a very broad-based coalition in the state to change the way that family members can petition to have loved ones admitted for mental health treatment. And right now in the state, it costs about $14,000 to provide someone involuntary treatment in Harborview for a week. But for $14,000, we can actually provide someone struggling with mental illness supportive housing with wraparound services at Downtown Emergency Services Center for a year. So we need to work diligently in places like this to shift the way that we fund on mental health policy so that we actually push more money into outpatient treatment, push more money into community-based alternatives, provide support for supportive housing so that we're not treating mental health in the emergency rooms. So that's one thing I was very proud to work on. The second is we have this issue in Washington State, and all states around the country, when people come out of our criminal justice system, we have about 8,000 people every year in Washington State who exit incarceration. And when those people exit incarceration, many of those individuals are Medicaid eligible. But we have this problem because when someone goes into incarceration, if you're incarcerated for more than 30 days, your Medicaid is terminated. So what that means is that when you come out of prison, it can take 18 months, a year to 18 months, to actually go through the paperwork to get back on Medicaid if you qualify. And we were able to change the law to change that termination to a suspension, so everyone coming out of prison now in Washington State, if they qualify for Medicaid, they'll be automatically re-enrolled. And that is at times when people need support most, whether it's access to emergency contraceptives, whether it's access to community mental health services, whether it's access to opiate treatment and methadone, if it's access to a methadone clinic. So I want to thank you all for being here. I would be honored by your support in November, but much more important than that, I'm excited about this policy discussion. So thank you very much.
So we have about 20 minutes for questions and answers to the panel. So the rule is going to be that you ask the question. No speeches, questions. David said, I'm a bulldog about this, okay? So why don't we, yes, go ahead. Mindy?
I have a question from Professor Marmor. What do you think is the most important policy change that would make Social Security most to keep on going internally? And I guess I was just wondering if scrap the cap, is that all we need to do? And then the difference, it's just so contradictory to me. We've got this income tax, which is the opposite. It's the structure of that is if you don't make enough money, you don't have to pay too much income tax, or if any. But this Social Security tax is just the opposite. If you make a lot of money, you hardly pay any percent of it in for Social Security. So I just would love to hear.
So just to repeat the question real quick, and I'll try to summarize it. It is asking Professor Marmor, what does he think will be the most effective policy thing to deal with the long-term ability of Social Security to pay full benefits and perhaps improve benefits?
Anybody who thinks we can make a realistic judgment about what the world would be like in 2050, these are just forecasts to keep within the ballpark. There's a false specificity here. We should be laughing at someone who says 73% will be paid in the year 2062. Now, that person needs a rest, maybe R&R of some kind. So it's part of the same thing. We're captured in a rhetoric of private savings. This is not private savings. That's the important thing to keep in mind. And a political movement is the director of change, not actuaries.
Is the Affordable Care Act on the pathway or an obstacle to single payer?
I turn out to be a mild critic of the ACA. Admiring its intentions, critical of its political judgment, and worried that it's eaten up a lot of space for reform by seeming to do the right thing, or the most that could be done in 2010. So I think it's a good question. Here's where I think the opportunities lie, and here's where I think the barriers lie. The opportunity lies in calling attention to that part of the ACA which can best be understood as indirect regulation of private insurance to make it look more like social insurance. All of those rule changes, the ones about a limit on lifetime benefits, about pre-existing conditions, all of those are designed to stop private insurers from doing what they're inclined to do. Now, they will find ways to get around some of those, but that's a very favorable move. And we should be seeing that as indirect social insurance. That's the value set. With respect to cost control, the most important thing to say about the ACA is that it has nothing in it worth a damn. It deludes people. One is competition among insurance companies. We've seen it already, and you've talked about it. Insurance companies leave the states when they can't make the amount of money that they want to make. The idea that private health insurance competition has no support internationally and no support domestically. The illusion was given that medical care costs generally fell when, of course, inflation fell. But the ratio of medical costs to the CPI remained at 2 to 1. This is not balderdash. This is just mindlessness and confusing the level with the relationship to growth and income and so on. So that's an area of, I think, squandering opportunity. And the one I suppose that I feel the most sad about, I don't know, this somehow maybe doesn't work in the question, but I just want to get the point out anyway. The advocates of the ACA in the Democratic Party treated critics of it as if they were traitors. They calculated that this was going to be a starting point that could never be rolled back. That's one. Two, they presumed, because of the experience in 93, 94, they presumed that the only way you could produce change in 2010, 9, and 10 was by doing something that was acceptable to Republicans or blue dog Democrats. So they took the design of subsidizing private insurance as the means from a paper that was written by the Heritage Foundation in the mid-1980s. And as a consequence of that, did not get one Republican vote. It is the worst bargain I've ever come across in American political life since I came alive to that in the early 1960s. So my answer doesn't go narrowly to your question, but I've now expressed the views that I would have had if you'd asked me directly about the ACA.
Said that I do think that the ACA has shown us what the problems are with trying to have a commercial system actually provide this kind of care. That's what I'm hearing all the time in the healthcare committee. And I have a deep sense of betrayal around the ACA because I was working on immigration issues at the time. Everybody remembers "You Lie," the famous "You Lie" speech, "You Lie" comment during the State of the Union. There was a fierce battle around who was going to be included. Now, the core of the idea of affordable care has to be that if you have more people in the pool, you are going to do better. But we left 12 million undocumented immigrants out. We also, by the way, refused to include even legal permanent residents who are eligible if they hadn't been here for a certain number of years. So we decreased the pool dramatically and did it while saying that that was the right thing to do. So it became, that these people don't deserve health care, which cuts at the core of the whole argument that everybody should have health care. And if you have that preventive care, everybody is going to do better because the costs are going to be lower if you take care of the problem up front. So I feel like I'm very mixed because I feel like the Affordable Care Act has provided huge benefits for millions of people across the state. I've seen them. I've seen a lot of those folks. We expanded also money for community health centers, which also serves undocumented immigrants in the process. But I also think that we conceded some core ideas in implementing the Affordable Care Act, and that's where we're now going to have to retract to say, no, actually, these are the core ideas, and we're still fighting for them as we move towards single payer. But I do think insurance companies leaving the space, to me, is an opportunity for us to say, they're never going to be in the space. So we must have single payer healthcare.
Yeah, great. That's a really good question. I mean, I think that a couple things. One is it's hard to dispute the good that's come from the expansion in coverage. I mean, if you go into community health centers in the state, just in Country Doctors on 19th on Capitol Hill, and looking at just the hockey stick, an increase in care provided with the Medicaid expansion. So I think there are really good things that came out of it. But what we're seeing is there's more being left now for states to fill in the gaps. And in Washington State, we see this. I mean, Senator Jayapal was mentioning undocumented coverage. We have those things set up in Washington State around like our Apple Health program, around other programs that fill the gaps where the ACA hasn't been. And not all states have that. So you're doing this, there's this other phenomenon happening where you're pushing more costs back on states like ours, where we've expanded dental care, we've expanded Apple Health programs that are covering kids that are being left out of the ACA expansion. So I think that you're seeing more costs being pushed on the states. And the second piece I'll say is just reiterate what the professor shared, which is that we expanded coverage, but we haven't controlled costs. And you're still seeing this dynamic. Where we don't, I mean, this was a fight we fought in the legislature this past year, trying to create transparency on drug costs. And those are not things that we achieved through the Affordable Care Act. And even today, we have 8 providers on the exchange, and we were losing some of those providers. And it was a tough loss when we lost the public option in the ACA debates. So again, mixed blessings, but there are a lot of opportunities there to push it forward. Thank you.
I'm the secretary of the State Democrats Disability Caucus, and my question is for the 2 candidates here. Often in the conversation about Social Security and Medicare, there seems to be this erasure of the fact that Americans with disabilities are covered under Social Security and Medicare. I want to know what you will do if elected to make sure that our voices are heard.
Well, why don't we start with Brady and we'll go to the show.
Thank you for the question. It shouldn't be, I mean, we as a legislative office have written so many letters on behalf of constituents who have had so much trouble trying to qualify for disability under Social Security. So we would, I mean, this is something that needs to be streamlined, something that needs to be kept front and center. And as we look at the expansion, qualification shouldn't be so challenging. I mean, it was interesting, just, gosh, about a month ago, I was speaking at a roundtable with a group of men in our community struggling with HIV and AIDS. It was a support group. And several of them had stories about how they'd been trying for 4 years to get Social Security and had been struggling with the paperwork. So I think that is something that's really essential and important.
Pramila.
You know, folks with disabilities are in that category of people for whom we are going to, we need to be providing care on an ongoing basis. It's not a temporary situation. We actually need to invest in the solutions that take care of people over time. So it does end up being more costly if you subscribe to the idea that taking care of somebody who needs that help has a cost that should be associated with it. So that's where I think we have to challenge the cultural assumptions and not only fight for folks to be included, but to change the underlying notion of what it means to take care of people's health that need it. And that's just one thing, you know, while Dr. Marmor is talking about making small changes that could have huge impact, I do think we're talking about transformational politics, which is different than saying that we can make small changes to fix the problem, but the politics of transformation are part of what we are going to have to build. Because it is a fundamental disagreement in, and not just disagreement, but a fundamental reworking, almost, well, it's like we're being told that something should be this way, when in fact we know that as a society, if we take care of people early and throughout their lives, that is ultimately going to be best for us as a society. And the costs get added to that core assumption in order to try to break down that core assumption. Does that make sense at all? So it's really that cultural piece and that transformational piece that we are going to have to continue to push for and fight for.
People with disabilities need to be part of that broader movement that's demanding retirement security for everyone, which includes health care and an income that they can live on. And we would look forward to working with those organizations and people with disabilities to do that work together.
I appreciate that. I will relay that information to our chair.
Thank you.
And where a lot of the basic assumptions in our culture are about competing with one another and hurting one another to get something for ourselves. As a culture, we've lost a lot of this sensibility or those values that you're appealing to, which are we're working collectively for the collective benefit of all of us. Culturally, you know, ever since I was a young woman and Reagan came to office, that's changed. So how do you think we change those cultural assumptions? And what do you think that we can do in organizing? What do you think that we do inside of our organizing tactics and inside of the language that we use in organizing that promotes different kinds of cultural assumptions about how politics are done?
Okay, Professor Marmor is chomping to get to this question.
That's probably true, but it's not with the connotation of attack, but with the connotation of taking that seriously. And my advice to you and others would be to go back to the Committee on Economic Security in 1934 and read it and ask yourself, is there anything different about 2016 than there was a case in 1934? Are the economic risks to a family, from a breadwinner, for example, being injured at work, in which workers' compensation are the answer, or for a breadwinner to be killed, and therefore a family losing that source of income, or someone outliving their savings or the number of children in the family outdistancing a decent capacity to pay where there's supplements that are required. In other words, the sources of economic security, of economic insecurity, are common. They've been extended, or to some extent, as you were suggesting, by changes in automation. Right? Automation is the analog to the replacement of horses by cars. I mean, the economic insecurity of work is exactly the problem. I really do think it's one of the great documents of American life, and it expressed ideas that were widely distributed in the society. Let me finish with just one more illustration.
I wasn't going to interrupt you.
You're a big fellow, I think you're standing. In 1934-35, if you went to the state university here, or Wisconsin, or Berkeley, or Illinois, and inspected the guidebook to classes, and you looked at economics, history, political science, and sociology, there is about a 90% probability that there would be courses in all 4 fields on social insurance. And here we have the most important social programs in America built on social insurance premises that nobody teaches about in the current form. So it's not that you can't imagine it, it's that we come to take it for granted as if it doesn't have to be understood. And it's the rediscovery of that which is the source to transformation, or retransformation is the way I put it.
Pramila, you want to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think a lot of it is around fear. And if we take on fear and we take on the idea that we have the same size pie no matter what happens, right, then we start to get at what is really underneath. And I would just say that, you know, in the beginning of the immigration debates 15 years ago, when the AFL-CIO had just reversed its position on immigration reform in 2000, the Democratic Party didn't have it on its platform. One of the things that we had to deal with all the time was people would say immigrants are taking, you know, Americans' jobs. And you still hear that now with Donald Trump, it's coming back again. But one of the phrases I always used to say is, this is not about whose jobs, it's about more jobs and better jobs. So if we can start to get to the place where we challenge these ideas of divisiveness and fear, I think we start to address some of those things. And I think that the other piece is, who profits? And I think the more we can ask that question of every policy that we see blocked, the more we will understand. And you look at, you know, some of the Heritage Foundation studies and people who have financed these studies that are supposedly neutral. If we look at that and see who profits, then we start to understand what is at stake, and there's a lot of money at stake. And so that's part of what we have to break down, I think, in order to start to have that change.
Brady.
Yeah, that question cuts to the type of change I dream of seeing in my lifetime, which is I hope that we are able to move in this discussion, just as I brought up in healthcare, using healthcare as an example, of how we focus public policies, listening to the data, to intervening at the beginning of people's lives before problems have developed. And I think that shift toward prevention, that shift toward, be it with mental health, providing early intervention and community-based care versus care in an emergency room, whether it's with criminal justice reform, that we provide people support early on so we close that school-to-prison pipeline where we see people incarcerated at rates 10 times as high as they ought to be. That shift of moving toward prevention, I think, is so important to bring down the costs in our system. And we can go across a myriad of areas. And there's 2 ways I imagine, I believe we can get there, because I think we've gotten there in some ways in criminal justice. We've seen the growth in kind of investments in early childhood development because of the science. And I think it's important not to, we haven't spoken much up on the stage yet about science. And I think that the science of prevention and the science of early investment and the innovation that's going to come out of the sciences can help us. And I believe it'll help push us in the direction of building the case, the social case, the movement case for those investments at the beginnings of people's lives.
This is a quickie. Hillary has brought up the question again of the public option. So my question is, what do you think of the public option? Do you support it or not? And if you do, what form do you think it should take?
Professor Marmor, you want to address that?
I think too much faith was put in the public option and is now being put in the public option. I think it's not that the public option has in any way questionable values, but it was an effort to bring the public programs into direct competition with the private insurance companies. And I think it's just time we accept that we live in a world of medical care in which 1% accounts for a huge percent of the expenditures. 5% accounts for 50% of it. With a distribution of expenses like that, exactly as the two congressional candidates spoke earlier, there's a game to be played by private insurance, which is to escape the high users. That's the name of the game. So every time we think about a public option, be sure to find in the Congress people insisting that there be liabilities attached to the public option to make it a fair competition, because they have lower administrative costs. But if you put a liability of that kind and make the public option open to anybody, and if the public option is better than the private options, you get adverse selection, which produces the loss of cooperatives all over the country. So public health insurance is a great idea. Public options as a form of public health insurance is not a very good idea, not because it's ill-motivated, but because it's incapable of dealing with the competitive arrangements that will hamper it in practice, in my view.
Right. I agree with what Dr. Warmer said. I agree.
Pramila?
I also agree, but I also think that the reason is if you have a public option introduced, all of the marketing from those commercial firms, they have a lot of money for marketing, is going to go towards getting the healthiest people in. And most of those commercial firms have enough money that they can subsidize the costs for long enough to drive public insurance out, public options out. I mean, that's what happens all the time in other industries. So, yes to everything he said, and it would not be hard to make it completely impossible for government to continue to provide a public option, because those companies just have so much more resources to subsidize.
Thank you. So we're gonna stop now. I know people have questions. You're gonna have to wait and ask it afterwards.